This is the most powerful city on Earth, but it is hiding a multi-billion-dollar secret. If you look at the skyline of Washington, D.C., you will notice something is missing, something that every other major capital in the world has. It is the only major global city with 0 skyscrapers. Most people think it is because of the Capitol building, but that is a myth. The real reason is legally forbidden and much stranger, involving a 14-story monstrosity, a 100-year-old panic over fire hoses, and a mathematical law that turns every street into a cage, costing the city billions every year. This is why Washington has the strangest skyline ever. In 1894, architect Thomas Franklin Schneider did something that would change Washington forever. He built the Cairo Hotel, and at 164 feet tall, it became the city's first high-rise. To understand why this was shocking, picture Washington at the time. The city was filled with 3-story row houses. Most buildings stood no taller than 40 feet. Then suddenly the Cairo appeared, towering nearly 5 times higher than its neighbors. People were horrified. Residents complained it would block out the sun forever. Others worried it would collapse and crush surrounding buildings. There were genuine concerns about whether firefighters could even reach the upper floors. The Cairo became known as a monstrosity. Newspapers ran stories questioning its safety. Public meetings demanded action. The outcry was so intense that Congress stepped in. This one building led directly to a law that has controlled Washington's skyline for over a century. When Congress passed the Height of Buildings Act in 1899, the official reason was fire safety. In the 1890s, firefighting technology was extremely limited. Water pressure was low, and fire hoses could only spray up to about 60 or 70 feet. Ladder trucks were short and could not reach higher floors. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 was still fresh in everyone's minds. When the Cairo was built at 164 feet, it exceeded the reach of any firefighting equipment by more than double. Congress argued that tall buildings would create uncontrollable fire hazards. But here's the interesting part. While fire safety was the stated reason, many historians believe the real motivation was aesthetic control. Thomas Jefferson had envisioned Washington as a city of low buildings like Paris, not a vertical metropolis like New York. The fire safety argument gave Congress a politically acceptable way to enforce that vision without admitting they simply did not like tall buildings. There is a widespread belief that no building can be taller than the Capitol dome. Tour guides say it, articles repeat it, residents believe it. But that belief is completely false. The original 1899 law did reference the Capitol at 288 feet. That reference lasted only 11 years. In 1910, Congress amended the law and removed the Capitol reference entirely. The new formula was much stricter. For residential streets, the limit is the street width plus 20 feet up to a maximum of 90 feet. For commercial streets, the limit is the street width plus 20 feet up to a maximum of 130 feet. Pennsylvania Avenue has a maximum of 160 feet. The actual legal limit for most buildings is 130 feet, which is less than half the Capitol dome's height. The Washington Monument, at 555 feet, is more than 4 times the commercial building limit. So why does the myth persist? Because it is a better story. The phrase "cannot be taller than the Capitol" sounds patriotic and simple. A mathematical formula based on street width sounds boring. The reality is Washington's skyline has nothing to do with the Capitol. Here's where it gets truly bizarre. The 1910 law ties building height directly to street width. This turns the city map into a series of invisible glass ceilings that vary block by block. A building on a 50-foot wide residential street can reach 70 feet. A building on a 110-foot wide commercial street can reach 130 feet. Washington's skyline is determined by decisions made in the 1790s about street width. When Pierre-Charles L'Enfant designed the city, he had no idea street width would control building height. He made some streets wide for grand boulevards and parades. He made others narrow for residential areas. Those 200-year-old decisions now determine exactly how tall every building can be. And because developers want to maximize expensive land, they build right to the legal limit and stop. This creates what planners call the tabletop effect. Instead of varied heights, every building in a neighborhood is exactly the same height, as if the city got a haircut with a ruler. Want visual proof? Look across the Potomac River to Rosslyn, Virginia. Rosslyn sits directly across from Georgetown, less than a mile away. But it is not part of DC, so the Height Act does not apply. The contrast is stunning. On the Washington side, buildings top out around 130 feet, cross the river into Virginia, and suddenly there is a wall of skyscrapers reaching 300, 400, even 500 feet. They are separated by a river only 1,000 feet wide, but the skylines look like different eras. This demonstrates exactly what Washington could look like without height restrictions. Rosslyn built high-rise offices, residential towers, and hotels. They created dense, vertical neighborhoods with metro connections. Washington was forced to sprawl outward instead of upward, pushing development into distant suburbs, increasing commutes, traffic, and infrastructure costs. Defenders of the height limit look at Rosslyn and say, "Thank God that is not us." The Height Act has created enormous economic consequences. Because floor space is legally capped, land values have skyrocketed. Land in central DC is approximately 32 times more expensive per square foot than land 10 miles outside the city. That is not because the land is inherently better. It is artificial scarcity created by height restrictions. Researchers estimate the Height Act imposes a shadow tax of approximately $1.4 billion annually on the Washington economy. This is not a real tax. It is lost economic value from preventing development that would otherwise occur. When a developer could build 40 stories but can only build 12, that difference is lost value. It shows up everywhere. Office rents are among the highest in the country. Residential rents average $2,500 for a one-bedroom. The city government loses an estimated $115 million per year in tax revenue from buildings that cannot be built. And housing constraints have displaced residents. Washington's black population declined by over 100,000 people in the past decade as rising costs forced longtime residents to distant suburbs. These costs are invisible because they are not budget line items, but they are real and affect everyone in the city. Here's the strangest part. Washington has zero power to change its own height restrictions. New York can modify zoning whenever the city council votes. Chicago can adjust heights in specific neighborhoods, and San Francisco can create transit-oriented exceptions. Washington cannot. The Height of Buildings Act is federal law, passed by Congress. Only Congress can amend or repeal it. DC has no voting representation in Congress. The city has a non-voting House delegate who cannot vote on legislation. There is zero Senate representation. This means residents and officials can debate all they want, but they have no legal authority to change it. Even if the mayor, city council, and every resident agreed, it would not matter. They would need to convince majorities in the House and the Senate to pass new federal legislation. In practice, that has proven nearly impossible. Over decades, multiple proposals have tried to modify the law, allow taller buildings near metro stations, create special zones, or complete repeal. Every single proposal failed. Why? Members of Congress from across the country have strong opinions about Washington's appearance. Some want to preserve its character. Others worry about diminishing federal building symbolism. Many see no reason to prioritize DC over their own constituents. Washington remains frozen in time, governed by a 1910 law based on 1790 street widths, unable to adapt to modern realities. What does the future hold? In the short term, probably not much. Political obstacles remain formidable, and opposition to tall buildings continues. Pressure is building. The housing crisis worsens as prices rise and residents are displaced. Economic costs become harder to ignore. A new generation of planners argues Washington could grow upward without destroying character. Recent proposals suggest modest changes. Allow 160 feet or 180 feet near metro stations to add housing without dramatically altering the skyline. Create exceptions for commercial corridors. Update the street width formula for modern construction. In 2019, Mayor Muriel Bowser proposed 36,000 new housing units by 2025. Planners quickly realized this was impossible under current restrictions and suggested that modifying the Height Act might be necessary. However, any change requires an act of Congress. Until federal lawmakers decide DC should control its own development, the city will continue having the strangest skyline of any major capital. A city of enormous power, frozen at 130 feet, defined by Victorian-era fears, unable to change without permission from politicians who don't even live there. That's not just strange. That's uniquely, bizarrely, frustratingly Washington. If you like this video, watch these next.